My son and his wife abandoned me in a wheelchair at the airport gate. They flew to Hawaii on my dime and had the nerve to text me that I missed the flight on purpose. They forgot my name was on the credit card in the booking. Their dream vacation was about to get very complicated. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Beverly Hayes, and at 72, I had become a student of limitations. For 40 years I had been a history teacher, a woman who strode confidently through the timelines of empires and revolutions. Now my own world had shrunk to the careful, measured navigation of my small, quiet home. A knee replacement, the surgeon had cheerfully called it a marvel of modern engineering, had left me dependent on a walker and, more distressingly, on the whims of my son Keith and his wife Crystal. The trip was supposed to be a celebration of my recovery, a grand family vacation to Hawaii. It was a dream I had held for years, a vision of watching my grandchildren play in the warm Pacific surf, of feeling the sun on my face without the familiar ache in my knee. It was more than a vacation. It was a reclamation of myself, a refusal to be defined by my temporary frailty. Keith, my son of 47, had been enthusiastic, at least at first. "That's great, Mom. A real family adventure," he'd said. But his wife, Crystal, a woman of 45 whose life was a carefully curated performance of suburban perfection, had been less so. Her smile was tight, her eyes scanning my walker with a barely concealed annoyance. "Hawaii is wonderful, Beverly," she'd said, her voice a little too bright. "But are you sure you'll be up for it? There's so much walking. The long flight. We wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable." Her concern was a familiar weapon, a soft, silken glove hiding a fist of pure, selfish inconvenience. For the past few months, my physical needs had been a constant, low-level irritant in her pristine, orderly world. My recovery was not a triumph to be celebrated, but a problem to be managed. Still, I insisted I was strong enough that my doctor had approved it. Reluctantly, they had agreed. The planning, however, became the next hurdle. It was during this phase that the crucial mistake was made, not by me but by them. "Mom," Keith said one evening, holding his tablet, "these group packages to Hawaii are expensive, but I found a great deal. The only way to lock in the rate is to book it all on one card." He exchanged a look with Crystal. "My cards are all close to their limit this month with the property taxes due. Your old card, the one with all the rewards points, it has a high enough limit. If we book it on that, you'll get a huge cashback bonus. It's the smartest way to do it. I can just pay you back for our share." I hesitated. I had added Keith to my credit card years ago for true emergencies only. It was a symbol of my trust. "I don't know, Keith," I said. "That's a very large expense to put on credit." "It's not really," Crystal chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. "It's a convenience. To get the best deal and to collect the rewards points for you. It would be foolish to let them go to waste. We're just trying to be financially savvy on your behalf." They framed it as a favor to me. Reluctantly, foolishly, I agreed. I gave them the card number, trusting my son to handle the transaction responsibly. That single act of trust, I would later realize, was the key they would use to try and lock me out of my own life, and the very key I would use to reclaim it. I chose to believe in the son I had raised, the man I knew existed somewhere beneath the layers of his wife's suffocating influence. I had no idea that their journey and mine were about to diverge so dramatically, so cruelly at the very gate to paradise. The airport was a chaotic river of humanity, a torrent of hurried footsteps, anxious voices, and rolling suitcases. For me, navigating the crowded terminal in my wheelchair, a last-minute rental insisted upon by Crystal for efficiency, was a dizzying, humbling experience. I felt like a small, helpless vessel being piloted through a storm, entirely dependent on the goodwill of my children. And their goodwill, I was beginning to realize, was in very short supply. Keith pushed my chair with an impatient, jerky rhythm, his sighs a constant, audible reminder of the burden I represented. Crystal walked ahead of us, her phone held aloft, likely already curating the perfect start to their vacation for her social media audience, a narrative in which I was sure my inconvenient presence would be carefully edited out. The check-in process was a tense, hurried affair. The security line, a slow, winding serpent of weary travelers, was an even greater trial. When it was finally my turn, I needed assistance to get out of my wheelchair, to navigate the metal detector. Keith and Crystal fussed with an air of theatrical martyrdom, their frustration a palpable force. I could feel the impatient stares of the people behind us, and a hot flush of shame crept up my neck. I, Beverly Hayes, a woman who had once commanded a classroom of 30 restless teenagers with nothing more than a raised eyebrow, was now a public spectacle of frailty, an object of pity and annoyance. We finally made it to the departure gate with less than 30 minutes to spare. The flight to Honolulu was already boarding. Families with small children, honeymooning couples, all the hopeful, happy travelers were lining up. "Okay, Mom," Keith said, his voice strained. "You just wait here. I'm going to get us some coffee and snacks for the flight. Crystal, you save our spot in the line." He disappeared into the crowd before I could even reply. Crystal, with a curt nod, joined the boarding line, leaving me parked by a large window overlooking the tarmac, a solitary, silent island in the bustling stream of passengers. I watched the minutes tick by on the large digital screen above the gate. 9:15, 9:20. The boarding line grew shorter. My anxiety grew sharper. Where was Keith? The final boarding call was announced, the gate agent's voice echoing through the terminal. Crystal, near the front of the line, glanced back at me, a strange, unreadable expression on her face, then turned away, inching closer to the gate. 9:25. The final call. My heart was now a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to stand to call out to Crystal, but my leg, stiff from the long wait, protested with a sharp, searing pain. I sank back into the wheelchair, a wave of pure panic washing over me. They couldn't just leave me. But they did. I watched in stunned, horrified disbelief as Crystal handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, walked through the door and disappeared down the jet bridge without a single backward glance. A moment later, just as the agent was about to close the door, Keith appeared, not from the coffee shop, but from a different direction entirely, running, his face flushed. He didn't have any coffee. He didn't have any snacks. He just had his ticket. He rushed to the gate, spoke briefly to the agent, and then he too vanished down the jet bridge. The door swung shut with a quiet, definitive click. The plane, my plane, the one holding my family, was leaving without me. I sat there, frozen, the noise of the bustling airport fading to a dull roar in my ears. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan. A cruel, calculated abandonment. Keith hadn't gone for coffee. He had deliberately waited, hidden somewhere out of sight, until the very last possible second, ensuring there would be no time for arguments, no time for scenes, no time for me to do anything but watch as they left me behind. And Crystal's final look. It was no longer unreadable. It was a look of cold, triumphant relief. Then came the final, most monstrous twist of the knife. My phone, which I clutched in my trembling hand, buzzed with a new text message. It was from Keith, sent, I realized, just as he was stepping onto the plane. "Mom," it read, "so sorry, you must have gotten lost in the crowd. We couldn't find you. The doors were closing, we had to board. Looks like you missed the flight. On purpose maybe, so you could get out of the trip you never really wanted to go on. Don't worry, we'll have a great time for you. Talk when we get back." Missed the flight. On purpose. The lie, the gaslighting, the sheer breathtaking cruelty of it, stole the very air from my lungs. They had not just abandoned me. They had already constructed the narrative, the one where I was the difficult one, the one who had ruined things, the one who had done it on purpose. I looked out the window at the massive jetliner as it began to pull away from the gate. A silver behemoth carrying my family, my dreams, my stolen vacation funds, away to paradise. And I, Beverly Hayes, their mother, their embarrassment, was left alone in a borrowed wheelchair at the departure gate, the victim of the most public, most humiliating, most cowardly betrayal of my life. For a long time I just sat there, a statue of silent, frozen grief amidst the swirling chaos of the airport terminal. The world moved on around me. Gates changed, flights were announced, families hugged goodbye, but my own world had ground to a screeching, horrifying halt. The tail of their plane, a tiny silver speck in the vast blue sky, was the last thing I saw before it vanished completely, taking with it the last of my naive, motherly illusions. The initial shock gave way to a wave of humiliation so profound it was a physical sensation, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. I thought of the pitying glances from the other passengers in the security line, of the gate agent who must have seen me sitting there alone as my son and his wife boarded without me. I was a spectacle, a tragic, abandoned old woman in a wheelchair. Their cruelty hadn't just been private. It had been a public performance. And the text message. That vile, self-serving little piece of digital poison. Missed the flight. On purpose, maybe. The audacity of it, the cold, calculated gaslighting, was a deeper wound than the abandonment itself. They weren't just leaving me behind. They were actively, viciously rewriting the narrative to make me the villain of my own story. They were already crafting the tale they would tell their friends, their children. Oh, Mom was just being difficult. She didn't really want to go. She made a scene and missed the flight on purpose, you know how she gets. Tears, hot and angry, finally began to fall. But as I sat there, weeping in my borrowed wheelchair, a new feeling, one I hadn't felt with such intensity in years, began to stir in the depths of my soul. It was the old Beverly, the history teacher, the woman who understood that empires fall not from external forces, but from internal rot, from arrogance, from a fatal underestimation of the quiet, seemingly powerless forces they seek to control. My grief, my humiliation, my profound sorrow, they were all still there. But they began to be overshadowed by a cold, clear, and utterly ferocious anger. A teacher's anger. The kind of anger that comes from seeing a profound injustice, a blatant disregard for the truth. They thought I was powerless. They thought that by leaving me here, physically constrained, emotionally devastated, they had won. They had my money, they were on their way to paradise, and I was left with nothing but my shame. But they had made a mistake. A critical, arrogant mistake. They had left me with the one thing they should have taken. Information. My mind, the one they saw as increasingly frail and irrelevant, began to work with a startling newfound clarity. I remembered the booking process. The tickets, the hotel, the entire lavish package. It had all been booked on my credit card. I remembered Keith's smooth explanation about rewards points, and paying me back in installments. The tickets, I realized, were not just their property, they were linked to me, to my account, to my name. What exactly had they booked? And what power did that give me? With trembling but determined fingers, I retrieved my tablet from my carry-on bag. Thank God I had insisted on keeping it with me. I bypassed the airline's app. That was their territory. I went directly to the website of the travel agency they had used, the one whose name was on the credit card statement. I had an email confirmation, of course, somewhere in the depths of my inbox, the one they had likely assumed I would never look at. I found it. The booking confirmation. And there was a detailed itinerary. 5 round-trip tickets from our city to Honolulu. But the return tickets, something caught my eye. The tickets were flexible, changeable for a fee. And the names. All 5 of us were listed. My ticket, the one I was supposedly not using, had not been cancelled. It was still an open, valid ticket in their booking reference. An abandoned ticket, as the title of this sordid chapter of my life was beginning to form in my mind. An idea so audacious, so brilliant, so filled with a delicious, ironic justice began to spark in my mind. They had left me behind. They had said I missed the flight. But what if I hadn't? What if I was just taking a later one? Better one? To a different destination entirely? The fury inside me was no longer a wild, chaotic thing. It was being channeled, focused, honed into a sharp, strategic weapon. I was no longer a victim weeping in a wheelchair. I was a survivor, a strategist. They had left me in the ruins of their betrayal, but they had foolishly left me with the blueprint of their escape plan. And I, the history teacher, the woman who understood the art of the counteroffensive, was about to use their own plan to orchestrate their downfall, and my own spectacular, triumphant rise. The game was not over. It had just begun. Armed with my newfound knowledge and a resolve that felt like a steel rod in my spine, I began to navigate the crowded airport terminal. It was a slow, arduous process, my walker clicking a steady, determined rhythm on the polished floor, but every painful step felt like a step towards reclaiming my life. I found the main ticketing counter for the airline they were flying, a long, snaking line of weary travelers in front of it. I took my place, my expression calm, dignified, betraying none of the inner turmoil. After a long wait, I finally reached the front of the line. The woman behind the counter, her name tag reading Sharon Miller, looked up, her expression a little weary. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you? Hello, Sharon, I began, my voice quiet but clear. I believe I have missed my flight and I need to explore my options. I slid my passport and the printout of the travel itinerary across the counter. Sharon's fingers flew across her keyboard. Yes, Mrs. Hayes. I see you here. Flight 237 to Honolulu. It departed about an hour ago. You were checked in but did not board. She looked at me with a professional sympathy. I'm so sorry, ma'am. That's a non-refundable ticket. We can try to get you on a later flight, but there will be a significant change fee, and the next available seat isn't until tomorrow afternoon. This was the moment. I took a deep breath. I understand, I said. It was a very confusing situation. You see, I was traveling with my family, my son and his wife. I am recovering from a recent knee surgery and require a wheelchair for long distances. They were supposed to wait for me at the gate. I paused, letting my words sink in, my gaze steady and unwavering. They did not. Sharon stopped typing. She looked at me, really looked at me this time, her professional demeanor softening slightly with a flicker of human understanding. She had seen it all at this counter, I was sure. The family arguments, the missed connections, the frantic tears. She recognized the quiet, profound pain of being abandoned. My son, I continued, my voice carefully neutral, seems to be under the impression that I missed the flight on purpose to... I showed her the cruel text message from Keith on my phone. She read it, her lips tightening into a thin, angry line. I see, she said, her voice now holding a new, colder edge. That's unfortunate. She looked back at her screen, her fingers now moving with a new, more determined purpose. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice dropping slightly, let me just review the full booking. Your son, Keith Hayes, made the booking for 5 passengers, correct? All paid for on a single credit card. That is correct, I said. My credit card. She nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She was starting to see it, the same thing I had seen. The leverage. The power. Well, Mrs. Hayes, she said, her eyes meeting mine, a spark of what looked like conspiratorial glee in them now. It seems there are a few interesting options available to you given the circumstances. Your ticket, since you were checked in but did not board, is still open and has a significant credit value. We could, with the change fee and a fare difference, rebook you on a flight. And since you are the primary card holder for the entire reservation. She trailed off, letting me connect the dots. What are my options, Sharon? I asked, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. She leaned forward slightly. Well, she said, her voice a low, delicious murmur. The economy cabin on tomorrow's flight to Honolulu is completely full. However, there are 2 seats available in first class. And your abandoned ticket's credit value would cover a substantial portion of that. More interestingly, the flight to San Diego, a lovely destination I hear, has first-class availability this evening. She paused. And it also seems that your son's ticket, as part of the same booking, has a flexible fare. Changes can be made. For a fee, of course. The idea, my audacious, beautiful idea, was not just possible. It was being presented to me on a silver platter by this unexpected, wonderful ally. Let's explore the first-class option to San Diego, shall we, Sharon? I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. And let's also explore what kind of changes might be made to my son's return flight from Honolulu. I believe his schedule may have just become a little more flexible. Sharon's smile widened. I thought you might say that, Mrs. Hayes, she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. Let's see what we can do to make your new travel plans as comfortable as possible. In that sterile, bustling airport terminal, under the harsh fluorescent lights, a quiet, powerful alliance was forged. 2 women, a generation apart, united by a shared sense of justice and a righteous indignation at the casual cruelty of a selfish son. He had left me alone, a helpless old woman in a wheelchair. He had no idea that I was about to use the very ticket he had abandoned to fly past him, to a new life, in a style he could only dream of. I spent that night not in a state of lonely despair, but in a comfortable airport hotel room, a small luxury I afforded myself with a sense of grim satisfaction. I had a proper meal, a hot bath for my aching knee, and for the first time in months, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a strategist, an architect of my own liberation, my plans set in motion, my course now irrevocably my own. The next afternoon I made my way back to the departure gate, this time with a quiet, unshakable confidence. I was not in a wheelchair but walking slowly, deliberately with my cane, my head held high. I had booked a first-class ticket to San Diego, a decision that felt less like an extravagance and more like a declaration of war on the small, petty life they had tried to assign me. The upgrade fee, as Sharon had pointed out, was significant, but it was a small price to pay for the profound satisfaction it would bring. It was, I thought with a wry smile, the first down payment on my new life. Boarding was a different experience this time. As a first-class passenger, I was invited to board first, a small courtesy that felt like a coronation. I walked down the jet bridge, my heart a steady, triumphant drum, and was greeted at the plane door by a flight attendant with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Hayes," she said, gesturing towards the front of the cabin. "Can I get you a glass of champagne before we take off?" I settled into my seat, a magnificent plush leather throne with more legroom than my entire living room it seemed. I accepted the champagne, its bubbles a delicious, celebratory fizz on my tongue. As the other passengers began to file in, I watched them, a quiet, serene observer. I thought of my family already in Hawaii, likely sipping piña coladas by a resort pool, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over their heads. They had thought they had left me behind. They had no idea I was about to fly right over them, literally and figuratively, on a trajectory they could not possibly imagine. The flight to San Diego was a dream, a seamless 5-hour journey of comfort and quiet luxury. I read a book, watched a classic movie, and enjoyed a delicious meal served on actual china with real silverware. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt cared for. Not with the grudging, resentful care of my son and his wife, but with a professional, respectful kindness that was a balm to my wounded soul. My revenge was not just in the act of escaping, but in the profound symbolic difference in our journeys. They had booked me a seat in economy, a cramped, uncomfortable space that mirrored the small, constrained life they had envisioned for me. I was now here in first class, a physical manifestation of my own reclaimed worth, my own self-respect. The most satisfying part of my plan, however, was yet to unfold. Before I had left the ticketing counter, Sharon and I had made one final crucial change to their booking. Keith's return ticket from Honolulu, the one he thought was secured for a week from now, had been adjusted. On my authority as the primary cardholder and booker, and with a rather substantial change fee charged directly to my account, a fee I considered a worthy investment, his return flight was now scheduled not for next week, but for 3 months from now. And his seat was no longer a comfortable aisle, but a cramped middle seat at the very back of the plane. Crystal's and the children's tickets remained unchanged. His return, I had decided, would be a solitary one. I pictured the moment a week from now when he would try to check in for his flight home, only to be told that his reservation did not exist. The confusion, the panic, the dawning horror as he realized what had happened. He would be stranded, alone, his family already departed, with no easy way back. He would have to call me then. And that call, I knew, would be the true beginning of his reckoning. As my own plane began its descent, the beautiful, sprawling coastline of Southern California spreading out beneath me like a jeweled carpet, I felt a sense of peace so profound it almost made me weep. This was not the vacation I had originally planned, the one filled with the forced cheerfulness of a family that no longer valued me. This was something far better. This was the first day of my new life. A life of my own choosing, a life of freedom, a life lived in first class both literally and metaphorically. The old me, the quiet, accommodating mother, had missed her flight. But the new me, Beverly Hayes, a woman of strength, of resilience, of quiet, formidable power, had just landed. I spent the first week of my new life in a state of blissful, defiant freedom. I checked into a charming, elegant boutique hotel in La Jolla, a place of understated luxury and serene beauty with a stunning view of the Pacific. I spent my days reading on the balcony, allowing the warm, dry air to soothe my aching knee, and exploring the beautiful coastline at my own unhurried pace. I hired a private guide, a lovely local woman named Maya, who took me to see the places the tourist brochures never mentioned. The hidden coves, the quiet art galleries in the Spanish village, the local markets brimming with life and color. I was living my dream. Not theirs but my own. I knew, of course, that thousands of miles away in Hawaii, the other half of my plan was about to detonate. On the day Keith and his family were scheduled to fly home from Honolulu, I sat on my hotel balcony in San Diego, a cup of freshly brewed coffee in my hand, and waited. The call came in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and gold. It was a frantic, sputtering, almost incoherent cry of rage and disbelief from Keith. "Oh, what did you do?" he roared, his voice cracking with a panic that was music to my ears. "My ticket. It's gone. They said my reservation isn't for another 3 months. 3 months. Crystal and the kids are at the gate, their flight is boarding, and I'm stranded here. In Honolulu. This is a nightmare. You have to fix this." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Fix it, Keith," I replied, my voice as calm and as serene as the evening tide. "I don't believe anything is broken. I believe your travel plans have simply been adjusted to reflect your new circumstances." "My new circumstances?" he shrieked. "What are you talking about? You did this. That woman at the airline counter, she said the primary card holder made the changes. You deliberately stranded your own son in the middle of the Pacific Ocean." "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "I did. You and Crystal felt I was too old and frail to travel, that I would miss the flight on purpose. You left me alone in a wheelchair at the gate and didn't look back. You thought you could discard me, humiliate me, and use my money to fund your perfect little vacation. You were wrong." I could hear him sputtering, trying to form a response, a justification, a lie. But I didn't give him the chance. "You see, Keith," I continued, my voice now like a shard of ice, "you taught me a very valuable lesson that day. You taught me that I am, in fact, on my own. And a woman on her own must be resourceful. She must be strategic. She must protect her own interests. So I did. I used the ticket you abandoned to start my new life here in San Diego. And I used my authority as the primary card holder to adjust your travel plans to a date that seemed more appropriate. 3 months should give you plenty of time to reflect on your actions, and to figure out how to buy your own plane ticket home." He was speechless, a rare and beautiful occurrence. I could hear his ragged, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. You can't just leave me here," he finally managed, his voice now a pathetic whimper. "I have no money. The onboard account, Crystal's shopping, it wiped out my debit card. I have nothing." "That does sound like an emergency," I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I suggest you find a solution. Perhaps Crystal's parents would be willing to wire you some money. Or maybe some of your important friends. You have always been so good at networking." And with that I ended the call. I heard later from my wonderful private guide, Maya, who had since become a dear friend and kept in touch, that the aftermath was a spectacular implosion. Keith was forced to make a series of humiliating phone calls, begging for money. Crystal and the children flew home without him, their triumphant vacation ending in a cloud of shame and recrimination. He was stuck in Hawaii for another 4 days until his father-in-law, after a lengthy, angry lecture, reluctantly wired him just enough money for a last-minute one-way ticket home. In economy. In a middle seat. Their marriage, I suspect, did not long survive the fallout. As for me, my revenge was not just in his suffering. It was in my own joyous, defiant act of living. I stayed in San Diego. I used my savings to buy the small, beautiful condo with the ocean view my sister had always dreamed of for us. I had flown to my new life. My son had said I would miss the flight on purpose. He was right in a way. I had deliberately missed the flight to the miserable, lonely, disrespected old age he and his wife had planned for me. Instead, I had caught a different flight. A direct, first-class flight to my own freedom, my own dignity, my own beautiful, sun-drenched future. And I had never felt more alive.